We move now to another candidate for President of the United States, Dr. Lenora Fulani. She is the candidate of the New Alliance Party, one of more than a dozen other candidates besides Bush and Dukakis. She is the only one of those others whose name appears on the ballot in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. She is here for a newsmaker interview, which will begin right after this setup report by Kwame Holman.
3646092. Our guest today on this extended version of Jazz 90s Crosstalk is Dr. Lenora Fulani.
Lenora Fulani is 38 years old and a developmental psychologist with a PhD. She ran for mayor of New York City in 1985 and for governor of the state in 1986. As head of the New York-based New Alliance Party, she travels the country speaking out for the rights of blacks, women, gays, Latinos, and Native Americans.
What kind of signal do you hope to send to the black community?
A powerful one. One that makes it very, very clear, and I think our standing together supports this, that there is a new and powerful independent leadership developing in the African American community that's not...
Fulani is running on a platform that supports, among other things, minority rights.
The thing that African American people have been fighting for in this country for a long time is freedom, fairness, and social justice. We still don't have that. The poverty in the African American community and the Native American community among Latino people is higher than it was when Johnson declared his fake war on poverty many years ago.
She wants to increase government funding for health care and housing and slash military spending.
I'm calling from the Fulani campaign office in New York.
This is the New Alliance Party's second run for the White House. In 1984, their candidate was on the ballot in 33 states. He drew 60,000 votes. This year, Fulani hopes to get 1 million votes from disaffected voters who feel ignored by the Democratic and Republican parties.
Those two parties are moving further and further to the right and closer to each other. So there's an unrepresented majoritarian grouping, in our opinion, and there needs to be a party and a candidate which gives expression to what those people want, and it's not the Democratic Party.
So far, the Fulani campaign has raised about $2 million. 880,000 of that came from federal matching funds. She is the only independent candidate to qualify for matching funds, and the only one to appear on the ballot in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Fulani's goal is to bring about a fundamental change in America's social policy. She tried to do that originally by supporting Jesse Jackson's campaign. When Jackson lost his presidential bid and Democratic nominee Michael Dukakis selected a conservative as a running mate instead of Jackson, Fulani decided it was time to teach the Democrats a lesson.
Our strategy should now be clearer than ever. The more the black community is responsible for costing Dukakis the White House, the more we do to make him a loser, the better off we will be after the election. Settled comfortably in the White House, Mr. Dukakis and the Democrats would forget us like yesterday's news. But out of power, due to our independent vote, the Democrats will be forced to take seriously the black agenda, the black community, and Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Reverend Jackson has not endorsed Fulani's campaign. Her best-known supporters are controversial ones, Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan and the political activist Reverend Al Sharpton. The campaign has focused most of its efforts on 8 states with large numbers of electoral votes and large black communities. Analysts agree the Fulani campaign's chances of affecting the election's outcome are very small.
Now to Dr. Fulani. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
What your main purpose is to defeat Dukakis, is to try to get blacks not to vote for the Democratic ticket?
And to make it clear to the Democratic Party that they can't take the black vote, the progressive white vote, and the gay and lesbian vote for granted. It's also to speak as the only candidate who is doing so in this presidential race in behalf of the black agenda, my people's fight for social and economic justice, a fight that we've been in ever since we reached these shores.
How are blacks helped by a Republican president and vice president over a Democratic president and vice president?
Well, the real issue is that we're not helped by either unless we have some way of impacting upon what they do. One of the things that people have brainwashed into believing in this country is that what matters in a race, be it for dog catcher or president of the United States, is who wins. But what really matters is who emerges from that race with political power and political leverage. I think we can see in the choice of Lloyd Bentsen, for example, over Reverend Jackson, that the so-called Reagan Democrats have a lot more power and control over the Democratic Party than we as black people and as builders of a rainbow movement in this country who helped Jesse Jackson deliver 7.5 million votes. When the rich white men who run the Democratic Party went into that back room and made a decision about who they would select as their vice presidential candidate, they said, look, don't worry about the black vote, we'll get it. Let's go after the vote that we have to work for. And when we get on, when people go out to the voting booth in November, they'll just pull that lever in the African American community and in the gay and lesbian community and in other disenfranchised communities because they have no choice. What the Fulani campaign says is that we have a choice, and we're going to fight like mad over the next 3 weeks to give the American people knowledge of this real option that exists for them.
How do you explain then Reverend Jackson's decision to support with enthusiasm the Democratic ticket?
Well, he has to live with it, is how I explain it.
I see, okay.
He made it very clear to us that he was going to go with whomever the nominee of that party was, and I don't hold that against Jesse. I think he did a brilliant job. We love him for that job, but many people in the African American community have no desire to go with him. Actually, what political analysts are saying, from people who've written articles on my campaign, from the Congressional Quarterly to the Boston Herald, is that the Fulani campaign, if it receives enough of the black vote, has the opportunity to determine who ends up in the White House. Tony Brown, a well-respected columnist in the African American community, wrote an article entitled "The Woman Who Might Choose the Next President." So we're going after that vote. I'm also going after the vote of the millions of people who are showing up in polls who are saying we don't see a real choice between Dukakis and Bush. We're not moved by them. They're not passionate. They're not, enthusiastically gathering support in this country because they don't represent us. One of the ways, too, I can tell that the campaign is catching on is because the heat has been turned up. I have been maligned and attacked. Any day I'm called a communist, the leader or a member of a cult. I'm brainwashing people. I belong to the LaRouchites. None of those things happen to be true. But I think we have the Democrats running scared. So much so, Michael Dukakis is spending $6 million in black media. This is record-breaking money. The presidential candidates have never spent that kind of money on black media. So much so that black Democrats like Ron Brown, who for 15 months has not said anything about my campaign, with Dukakis failing in the polls, is, being called on. He's calling my attempts ridiculous. Ron Walters, who was a strategist for Jesse's 84 and 88 campaign, is saying things like, Fulani is not a credible black leader. She's not organic to the black community. This is nonsense. It's these people's attempts to hold on to the paychecks that they get as black leadership from that party while our people are failing in the streets. And my campaign is exposing that level of leadership in the African American community, amongst gays and lesbians. And what the people of this country are saying is that we are not going to finance their yachts and their limousines and their academic, sit-outs while we're in the streets slugging it away because we're being robbed by both parties and excluded from an electoral process by their abuses of power.
So you are running for president, but you're not running to be president. Is that right? In other words, you're not saying or suggesting that there's any chance that you could be, in fact, elected. Is that right? Not
unless we build a national third party, which is what I'm running to do.
But I mean 3 weeks from now.
I have no illusions about ending up in the White House. What I plan to do is to establish the option for the American people when they go to the booth to have someone other than this rich white man or the other to vote for. People need real options. That's what they're crying for in all of the newspapers, letters to the editors, and editorials.
How would you summarize your qualifications to be president?
Well, I've never been a grade B actor. I obviously am not, wealthy, nor am I a white man. My qualifications, like Reverend Jackson's qualifications, come from my leadership ability and the capacity to organize, 1.5 million people to come out and support my campaign through giving me their signatures. Over 100,000 people have written out checks in order to support the campaign. My qualifications is that of a black woman who's sick to death of being run over and under by a two-party system that does not represent me, and who's willing to do whatever I have to do and take whatever risks there may be involved in running for president in order to provide people with an option.
What risks? You've mentioned that a couple of times. What kind of risks are you taking by running for president?
Well, I mean, basically, it's the risk of running up against the wealthy white men who control the system, of qualifying, doing all the hard work of qualifying for being included in the debates by virtue of the objective criteria that exist, and having the Democrats and Republicans pretend like there's not a third candidate, going into federal court, spending the money to get there, having a federal judge rule.
Just to get on the ballots, you mean, in these states?
Right, definitely. Having the federal judge rule in this case that I had against the commission who sponsored both debates, that the questions that I was raising about the invalidity of the tax-exempt status of that commission were absolutely right on. But he would not call for an injunction because he did not wish to disrupt the political order. Also, the risk of being maligned by, you know, the real folks in the Democratic and Republican Party, that leadership, people like Ron Brown who get on TV and say things like I'm ridiculous, when in fact what I'm doing is providing my people and the other disenfranchised people in this country an opportunity and option to express our total disillusionment with these two parties.
Do you have any message for the franchise people? I mean, for the majority whites. Do you want them to vote for you? What would be their message to them?
Well, the message that many have responded to, which is a message for a fight in this country for democracy. I think it's being eroded. I think we need to be very frightened by the abuses of power by the people who run this nation. I think, you know, for the folks who are turning up in polls and saying, I don't know who to choose from, many of those people come from all walks of life. I think what they have to do is to do what the Chilean people did just a week and a half ago, to say no to a process that is alienated from all kinds of common people, that does not represent us, and that is not really steeped in or cares about democracy. I care about the people of this country. I really got fired up in 7th grade civics class when they told me that the thing that we had going for us as a nation was a participatory democracy that represented all folks. I found out as a young black girl watching my father die at the age of 12 because an ambulance service would not come into the community to pick him up.
Because it was a black community? They didn't serve
Because it was a
blacks?
black community and a poor community.
Where was that? Was in Pennsylvania,
Chester,
right?
Pennsylvania. That justice did not extend and that you had to fight for it. And that's what I've been doing, fighting for it, standing up and saying that we as the African-American community must lead the way in making it possible for us to determine the direction of our country, not a handful of elitist, racist, and exclusive white men.
You have said, you've conceded that you don't expect to be elected president, but you must have considered, have you not, what a Fulani presidency would be like? What would be different about it?
Well, one thing is that I would have to fight my way to the White House, given that this whole process is so unfairly controlled by, you know,
but you're on the ballot in all
be.
50 states. I mean,
Basically,
people can vote for you.
One of the things that I would do right away, which is what I've been fighting for very strongly, is more inclusion on the part of the American people. I think we need automatic voter registration. I think we need to send out a message to the Congress, the Senate, and other forces that control the country at a state and local level, that the people of this country will be more involved, that we really do believe in democracy, that there must be a majority rule. Let me just give you an example of something that has been very surprising to people. In the state of Indiana, both Dukakis and Bush filed late and are on the ballot illegally there. I am the only presidential candidate on that ballot legally. In the state of Missouri, where Ron Paul, the libertarian, did the same thing, he was thrown off, and every appeal to get on has been denied him. I have taken this message out. We actually sued the Board of Elections in that state to fight against that abuse of power, because what I've been teaching the American people is that that abuse is not just the abuse to an independent, it's an abuse of our democratic rights. And people are shocked. They're shocked at the exclusion. They say, Dr. Fulani, are you sure you're on the ballot in all 50 states? Maybe they don't know it. Maybe that's why you weren't in the debates.
Yeah.
But they do know it. But they don't care about us. They care about projecting images that allow them to win while we continue to lose.
You've talked about taking risks, but it seems to be like you are enjoying yourself, are you not?
I am that, but it's still riskful. You know, I have two young children, a 15-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. Also, when black leadership stands up in this country and speaks out in behalf of social justice, it's been known that we get our brains blown out. We see what's happened to other independent black leaders. I, for example, am a very staunch supporter of Tawana Brawley and the Reverend Al Sharpton, who's also endorsed my campaign. And we've seen the New York Times and other major newspapers in that state go out of their way to misconstrue the facts of this young woman having been raped and attacked by white law enforcement agents.
And also many blacks, too. just for the record, a lot of the black leaders have also criticized that. I mean, take an opposite position than what you take.
Right, but there is a gap, which is the point that I'm making about my candidacy, between what black leaders do and what the people in the streets do. I invite Ron Brown and Ron Walters and all of these other so-called black leaders to come into the community, and the people
I'm just
who,
talking about the
right, and the people who are
Raleigh case.
criticizing Reverend Sharpton, and to listen to what the people are saying about his leadership and his support of our people in that state.
Dr. Fulani, again, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck to you.